Hi, I'm Sio, and I want to take you on an adventure into one of the infinite dimensions, walled off yet connected by the warp. In this dimension, events that would be familiar to us are changed in the slightest ways, cascading out of control, yet ultimately leading to a horrifying event known as the Angel Apostasy. In this video, we will perform an autopsy upon one who may have been the best of us, but through a mixture of unfortunate circumstance and willful ignorance has become a caricature of the very evil he was created to punish. Once we have flayed past the skin-thin lies and uncovered who and what he truly is, we will see what he could have been if given a fraction of the chance of his brothers. I speak of none other than the irascible, the melancholy, the romantic, the poetic, the silly goose, the corpse-rending, man-eating, skin-flaying, nervous system-snorting, monstrous wreck noctis, the night haunter, Konrad Curze! I will give a very brief introduction to Konrad, as I assume most already know his lore, but I studied under the Stanley School of Kung Fu, and some wayward fans of whatever YouTube recommended may not have heard of him. So if you want to skip the retelling and go straight to the good new stuff, go to the time code in the description. So Curze is one of the Emperor's 18 to 22, depending on who you ask, test tube sons. While in a lab under a mountain being prepped for galactic nursery school, a giant rift opened up in the roof and ripped all the pods out of their incubation ports. It sent them to all manner of theme park-like worlds, a very Islands of Adventure, Kingdom Hearts vibe. While some got to experience the wonders of Camelot Land, Viking Island, and Arrakis, our special little Mr. Konrad plummeted directly down to Halloween Horror Nights, where the theme was deranged criminals and everyone was really into method acting. Oh, he was a busy boy. He spent his time there learning about its unique culture, beautiful poetic language, and eating people. Along with this, he worked on his art, leatherworking and macrame, out of still-living flayed skin and nervous systems, respectively. Sure, our boy suffers from a lot of things, various skin conditions, a plethora of mental illnesses, but he doesn't suffer from the toolbox fallacy. He continued on until the majority of the world was cowed down in terror. Eventually, the Emperor picked him up and was like, I see you're an artisan, and the galaxy can use a little sprucing up here and there. And oh, how he spruced. He taught his sons all about the craft of war crimes, had whittle squabbles with his brothers, and committed unforgivable sins by stopping Corvus from killing a Lorgar. Why would you do that? And eventually led to his own Epstein-style death where he was totally killed by an assassin. Totally. For sure. There's no way that won't stick. That is the short of his life and quote-unquote death. For context, this video is mostly informed by his Primarch novel. Like most of you, I have that cultural osmosis of Konrad, what he's done, his brothers that he's fought, all that jazz. But I'll be real with you, I never expected to do a video on him, and the results of the poll shocked me into reading about him. So I quickly burned through his novel. And like his eyeless, armless, legless servant fed to his legion, I get the appeal. I know there's more context with him messing up Dorne and terrorizing Ultramar, but I'm focused on his origins, into the Night Haunter, or rather, into Konrad Curze, and the Primarch book covers that. If I missed any especially sweet context, let me know in the comments. If I ever get to writing out his full entry in the Apostasy, I'll be sure to read all of his books for full context of his character. I knew I didn't want to do the Batman meme, but I saw the easy impulse to be like, what if Konrad were le good? And I just hated it. It felt necessary to understand exactly what made him tick and turn, to understand what he would become, and even if he could become good. Spoilers for the book, but the source material makes it blindingly obvious that not only could he be not a monster, but he could easily be good, if not one of the best. And quite frankly, I'd expected and half hoped it to be more ambiguous, as to have more of a blob of putty to play with and mold, rather than this easy platter of good crews that they give us. Why is he this deranged maniac, then? Why is he this monster? Why is he the Night Haunter? The book makes it pretty clear. His pod crashed deep into the earth after going through layers of the Hive City, all of which he had to dig out of as an infant, and so the only way he could not die of exhaustion and presumably injury was through eating some criminals at random to heal himself. Now consider that for a moment. You're this super child demigod with perfect edict memory and ingrained genetic understanding of laws, most of which you have no context for, but just understand. And you're forced to revert to this bestial state to not die. Meld that with the fact that he has this organ, the amophage, which allows him and his sons to eat a person's flesh and gain their memories, thoughts, and feelings. All this raw info, only seen through the lenses of pain, primal fear and hunger, and the hateful, sadistic memories of a random thug you were forced to eat. That stew could only realistically end up in the kind of screwed Konrad Curze we know. Let me ask you a question. How does one deal with this trauma? A normal human would go mad. A lesser Primarch would lean into the context willingly. But Konrad, our Konrad, no, he's torn. He hates what he is and what he has to become, what he feels he has to become. His entire character is motivated by a struggle with the question of free will. Does it exist or is fate preordained? His answer to that question is biased by his earliest instinctual survival actions. He used motivated reasoning to cope with his skewed context, the memories of those he needed to eat against those of his ingrained understanding of justice. He screams and rages and wallows about the injustice of fate because it's the only explanation for his early actions. He knows it was unjust in his genetic code, and the only answer to such crimes is death, so he spirals into suicidal fury, lashing out at everyone and everything: his sons, his brother, his father, the entire galaxy and life itself. Here's the neat thing. We know he knows. We see through his eyes how he sees another universe where instead of butchering some young rapist, he leads him to a life of virtue where he changes his ways and makes Nostromo a better place by Konrad's side. And Konrad holds him, dying. He's like, "Thank you, Daddy." And Konrad closes his eyes and gives him a kiss on the forehead. He said, "Well, you did good, son." Later, when Curze gets a little pet slave, armless, legless, eyeless, because Curze is bored, the guy reads Curze's mind when he's contemplating about fate. And like an idiot, he says out loud Curze doesn't believe it. Just guess what happens to that guy. The final nail is later when the Emperor, it's not space madness, shut up, speaks to him through a flesh puppet Konrad made. The Emperor drives the point home for the third time, saying everything, your space madness included, was a choice, and you just picked wrong. Like I said before, it was pretty heavy-handed, but at least it's clear. I said at least, but that's not really what I wanted. Shut up. This understanding of his origin raises the obvious question that, if the deck was not so heavily stacked against him, what would he be? Is it to his credit that when given in especially horrible circumstances, his good nature drove him to madness fighting against his monstrous socialization or lack thereof? Does it mean that he would easily be one of the most stalwart and morally good Primarchs? Or does it suggest a weakness in his character, that when faced against adversity, he crumbles where others would have stood firm? That, like the Emperor said, sucks to suck and you pick suck. For were not the lion and the raven also forsaken to hell? I think the specific ameliorating circumstances lean me towards the former. I argue that the bat situation was especially brutal, and the lion, who, as far as I understand it, has special anti-warp protection, and the raven had some small helping of human morality of the people in the slave mines. I imagine warp-sensitive like Magnus or Lorgar, if sent to Caliban, would end up far more corrupted, and if Konrad was sent to Corax's world, he would have made that place shipshape in no time. Before we get into what Konrad becomes, we have one more, really the most pressing question to ask. What was his original purpose? We see the sole niche it became. He terrorized worlds into compliance with little bloodshed, and presumably the Emperor was fine with his methods since they were effective, but what did the Emperor originally envision Curze to be? To find this out, let's look at hints in their Legion contemporaries and genetic stock. As we know, the roles each Legion fill are like overlapping arcs of fire. They have wide redundancy, yet excel in small niches. The World Eaters and Space Wolves are both rampaging berserkers, but the Wolves are a targeted fury, where the World Eaters are a force of nature that nothing is safe from. The first and obvious relation is Corvus Corax and his Raven Guard. They are both stealthy legions who heavily utilize jump packs for precise strikes. The other, which came to me way too late and hit me literal pages before I read a direct comparison to them in the books, are the Blood Angels. And in retrospect, it's painfully obvious. Both utilize brutal shock tactics with utter savagery against their adversaries. We'll come back to the Blood Angels soon, but let's take a look at what Konrad's gene seed offer to his sons. The Night Lords are a shockingly pure chapter with the only mutations of note arising in their pale white skin and black eyes, which is pretty notable since it's the exact mutation the Raven Guard have. The only other thing of note is pretty huge. It's future sight similar to Sanguinius, which Konrad has, and he suffers from, and is passed on to his sons. Curze sees not just a fixed future, but also futures that could be. While it can be a double-edged sword at times, it's also a wonderful tool if only you saw it that way. I think there's too much made of his connection to Corax, and the focus should be more on his parallels to Sanguinius. They are in many ways a funhouse mirror of one another. Sang is tanned with blonde curls, where Konrad is pale white with straight black hair. Sanguinius exudes charisma and is loved by his brothers, where Konrad is loathed and feared by them. Sanguinius dies surrounded by the beloved, and Konrad dies alone and ignominiously. In this dichotomy, I believe we see what Konrad should have been. The cool application of law to Sanguinius' burning passion, where Sang is outwardly charismatic with dark vampiric underside. Good lord, I forgot about the vampire connection between them until right this second. Konrad is seemingly doggedly adherent to the law and his sense of morality, but underneath it he's very empathic and understands the causes of criminality and strives towards redemption for all mankind, both from crimes and just their inability to live up to the Emperor's ideals. I think Konrad's story should start with a minor hiccup. A ganger's desire to rise in the ranks leads him to acquiring heavier gear, some sort of large RPG. He winds up in an inevitable skirmish, and through misfortune and fear, misses the target by an insanely large margin, basically shooting into the air. This rocket goes up and up and up until it's about to peter out and come down, and on a high level of the Hive City, turns and blows out a window and tears up the insides. This is the private apartments of some criminal higher-up, whose wife and daughter were in said apartments. The wife dies horribly from the explosion, but her body protects her poor daughter from the worst of it. Unfortunately, glass and debris scar and mutilate her face, leaving her partially blinded. So I'm thinking about maybe bringing her back in some sort of future iteration and in some important part of the story, but for right now, she's not super important. Her father, on the other hand, incredibly suspicious and furious, uses this tragedy to go to war with his enemies, increasing the violence across the Hive. In direct response to the tragedy, the Hive exterior and many interior walls were reinforced with adamantium, an incredibly resilient metal and the planet's chief export. The result of one rocket would change the course of the galaxy, because soon after the installation, a meteor from the heavens falls towards the same Hive on Nostromo. The pod that in another world would rend a ragged tear through the planet's adamantium crust would only puncture through the first wall of refined and reinforced adamantium. Walled and stalled at unlucky angles would only rob the pod of some of its momentum, leading to it ricocheting and ripping through internals of the Hive. Imagine this rare sight. A kind, law-abiding citizen who has persevered, worked hard and stayed in the straight and narrow, just long enough to afford a small apartment for his family in the relatively safe part of the Hive, is sitting down for dinner. One second he's smiling, asking his son about his day. The next, his son is replying to empty air as the pod tore through the room, leaving his father as a superheated smear on a neighbor's wall. This continues layers deep until it finally stops and falls through some access alley between commercial districts. Nothing within the depths of Nostromo goes unmolested for long, and soon vagrants start poking around it, looking for anything valuable at best, and at worst some scrap to hawk for another shot of trank or maybe a bottle of rot gut booze. But before they could make off with anything valuable, some lads locally, from the local gangs who run a protection racket on this subsector run into them with threats and a few brandished blades. More excited and less cautious than their vagrant predecessors, they start pulling at the scuffed pod haphazardly until one hand reaches the right lever and the pod slowly opens. The gases release, and as they see large black eyes looking up at them, they're spooked at first, but soon avarice overtakes that feeling. One of them suggests selling it to a slaver/human trafficker, as they pay a pretty penny for fresh meat, even mutants. They quickly decide to pawn it off on the lowest member of the totem pole. Let's call him Pip. Begrudgingly, Pip takes baby Konrad back to the drug den he calls a home. The other lads take their time and get back to him about the child months later. They find Pip different than before, with a new hanger-on, an older child, and no baby. They ask him something like, "Where's the baby? Who the fuck is that, his brother?" Pip, unable to make eye contact with them, says he doesn't want to hang out with them anymore and slowly closes the door. The main lad slams the door open and pulls out a gun. He says the people he contacted are not people to mess with, and they're expecting a baby, not to give him any fucking kid. He tells them that the boy is the baby. He just grew really fast. They scream bullshit and start to hit him before Konrad intervenes. He grabs the gun and breaks the lead lad's hand, but he lets them go with their life. At some point, Pip was making him food, maybe opening a can of corpse starch, and he slices his hand on it and throws it to Curze to eat. Hungry, Konrad eats it, blood and all, and gets the memories informing him of his life and what led Pip there. The story continues and you find out it's a very teen dad situation where Konrad is Socratically working through basic morality with Pip. They go through a whole ordeal with one of the many crime syndicates, like a buddy comedy but with a lot more depressing hive horrors, and it ends with Pip sacrificing his life, potentially needlessly, to assist Konrad in a major way. This connection, this bedrock of morality, an example that even the lowest cur can be redeemed, leaves an impact on him. By the time the Emperor comes to Nostromo, Konrad has taken over the world and provided order. It's far from bloodless, but the regime built was far more profitable than what had come before, and many criminals found the opportunity it presented too appealing to pass up. Little did they know that this new world order was built on a moral foundation that would eventually rip out and replace their old culture root and stem. Before they knew it, their cultural heritage of scum and villainy that many in positions of power clung onto faded from memory. I would go more into what Konrad and his legion's role is in the apostasy writ large, but it's so heavily intertwined with Sanguinius's that it would take a whole another video to paint it out for you. So for now, let's finish by taking a look at their legion, its aesthetics, iconography, and meaning. 2 points of note. Konrad, when reunited with the Emperor, is given both his name, Konrad Curze, and the title of the Emperor's Justiciar. It's mostly symbolic, but like Russ as the Executioner and Perturabo as his Lord of Iron, he takes it deadly seriously as a mandate of what is expected of him. It's also noted that the men in Konrad's retinue are all missing a digit on one of their hands. Konrad had become a habit both when he screens potential persons of interest for positions in his organization and for when he had time to visit wretches convicted of terrible deeds. He'd remove one of their fingers, eating it to better understand them. Usually the sacrifice must be given willingly, but on more than one occasion he had snacked on a particularly obstinate person with potential. That practice became so prevalent that it became immortalized in their iconography. Their badge, a four-fingered fist clenching firm a rod of dangling scales. Some iconography with more detailed heraldry might have the fist holding more elaborate scales, with the skull on one side and an eagle's head on the other, symbolizing keeping the balance between what's best for humanity and the Imperium, as they both must serve each other. Regardless of the exact details, the core of the icon remains. The color of their armor scheme will play a symbolic role, which will emphasize the dichotomy between Konrad and Sanguinius. Giving a little away, Sanguinius' armor will change like that of Horus as he ascended to War Master and descended to Chaos. Unlike the main timeline, Sanguinius will don blood red armor like his sons. What I'm currently uncertain about is when and what will be the change. Will he start in blood red as a closer connection to his sons, and then don his iconic gold armor among ascending to War Master? Or will he start with the same beautiful golden artisan armor, and then when he ascends to War Master, will he adopt a blood red suit to both show that he's still one of his men, but that his legion, by virtue of being adorned as their Primarch and War Master, are first among equals? I'm not sure, but what I am is that he eventually will darken to black as he turns. I like the idea that Sang and Curze are mismatched. Sang has blood red armor that becomes black as he walks in the shadows, and Konrad's night blue and black armor become white and gold as he enters the light. He keeps his blue for a while, but as his legion's character reaffirms its commitment to the Imperium, it takes a turn to white and gold. Their name and battle doctrine has changed as a result of a non-demented Curze. Instead of the Night Lords, they become the Salvage Sons. Konrad's fixation on redemption and service through recruitment carry on through its name. I think it also further emphasizes the dichotomy between them and the Blood Angels. They, being very proud of being human at their core, have their name to reflect that, against the highfalutin angels of death that are the Blood Angels. Now, as a side note, let me be very clear. The Salvage Sons are not caricatures like the Salamanders are often portrayed. They still have post-human demigods gathered from criminal stock, reformed or no. But they keep that to the front of their mind, that they're still human, and their primary role is that in service to the human Imperium. A last point about the Salvage Sons through the Great Crusade. They adopt a very similar strategy to the Blood Angels' War of Ultimatum, where the Primarch or member of the Legion descends to a world in an attempt to convince them to join the Imperium before the bloodshed of compliance. I think the fact that you have this reformed criminal stock, even if they are kids, would lead to a lot more variations of this, just in kind of like the little bit of mindset that carries over past the psycho-indoctrination. With Konrad in relation to this tactic, if he were ever lucky enough to suffer one or multiple visions of the future, I imagine he would use that insight to inform his negotiations, to potentially save lives and redeem these planets. Whoa, lad, that brings us to the end of another video, and the beginning of Konrad Curze, the Justiciar. If you enjoyed it, leave a like and subscribe. I'm currently recording this at 1 in the morning, before the Friday that I'm going to post this. I still have to edit this, so yeah. I appreciate it, and I'd like to see the number go up. And let me know what you think about the direction I took Curze down. Do you like it? Was it too obvious? I really wanted to keep away from the Justice is Blind sort of thing, with the Legion being named like the Redeemers and the Legion icon being a skull with a blindfold, although that does kind of sound cool. Give it a cigarette and a bottle of monkey shoulder and a motorcycle, and we have one of those born to shit, forced to wipe memes. Oh, I'm sorry. On that lovely note, thank you again. See you.